I'm joined by Hitesh Jain. He's advocate both at the Bombay and the Supreme Court of India. He's close to the Bharatiya Janata Party. Argo Sengupta is lawyer and founder Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, was also part of the committee that was looking at privacy and data protection laws. Appreciate both of you joining us. Hitesh, to you first. Do you believe that the time has come to regulate digital content? Is Ranveer Alabadia's case a turning point? Should YouTubers get away with things that a Rajdeep Sardesai cannot on his show?
Well, I think a reasonable regulation is always necessary to, prevent harm without stifling the free speech. That's my personal view. Because even under the law, if you look at the Constitution, as differentiated from the American Constitution, we do not have an absolute free speech. And the free speech is always subject to reasonable restriction. So, so long as the regulations are reasonable and they do not stifle.
Now, if I may ask, who in your view should do these regulations? Who should be the regulator, Hitesh?
Well, the lawmaking body, of course, is the government of India. The parliament will have to make the laws or frame the regulations.
So you're saying Parliament frames regulation, Parliament frames the laws.
Government will frame the regulation.
Under which YouTubers must operate. Argo Sengupta, are we heading therefore to possibly some form of censorship?
See, Rajdeep, I think the question is not whether Ranveer Allahabadia should be held to a different standard as Rajdeep Sardesai. Ranveer Allahabadia has the same standard as Rajdeep Sardesai. If you say something obscene and if he says something obscene, then the criminal laws apply. So I think that's not the question. The question really is on YouTube. Because the fact is that you can't get away today if you are printing something in a newspaper. There is liability that exists for editors for what they are printing. But YouTube does not have this liability today because YouTube is seen in law as an intermediary. And as an intermediary, then what it gets to say is that I don't know about what content is being posted on my website. I am merely an intermediary. People get to post that content. Now, that was done at a time when YouTube was a startup in Silicon Valley in the 1990s, and it wouldn't have been able to grow. But now that it has grown into this behemoth, it's no longer YouTube, it's part of Google. We really need to revisit the fact that YouTube should have a reasonably blanket intermediary safe harbor from intermediary liability. So one is that we need to think about what kinds of regulations are needed for intermediaries such as YouTube, number one. Number two, and I think this is very critical, is that if you see Ranveer Alabadia's comments, I think it's too distasteful to even discuss. I think there's no two views on that. But the fact is that I think the most harmful effect of this is on children. And the cat is really out of the bag before even we are starting to talk about regulation, because everyone knows about what has been said and not been said. So here I think that we need to take some stronger measures, such as of the kinds that Australia has done, which is look to ban children from social media, including YouTube, below a certain age. Children should not be allowed to access.
No, 1 minute. You've raised an important point, and I just want to tell you what happens globally and then come back to it. Argo, regulation of online content. United Kingdom, there's an Online Safety Act 2023. Providers of certain internet services should take measures to protect users from illegal content. In US, there's the US Communications Decency Act. Platforms are not held liable for user-posted content. That's important. Australia, which you just cited, their Online Safety Act, restricted access system, declaration in place at all times that limits exposure of those under 18 to pornography of inappropriate content. And the European Union Digital Services Act calls for a crackdown on all illegal and problematic content. Now, you're saying that we could go the Australia way, that if I'm under 18, I will be denied access to YouTube. I'm sitting in my house. Are you telling me police will enter people's rooms to check whether an 18-year-old or 17-year-old is watching porn or watching obscene content?
No, actually, it's actually not about porn or obscene content, because this information that you had about Australia is a little bit dated. What they have actually done is ensured that persons under the age of 16 now cannot create social media accounts. And there is age-appropriate verification that is done in order to ensure this. So it is not as if you're inviting police into people's houses. The police does not have the capacity to do this, and we don't want the police to do this. But the fact is, this responsibility should be on platforms to ensure that people who are using them are are people who are adults who understand what it is that they're doing. And that's point number one. Point number two, in terms of the Indian law is taken from the section 230 of the Communication Decency Act in the United States that you talked about, which kind of gives what is called a blanket safe harbor. And countries have moved away from that. Now, there is a real challenge when you move away from that, which is what you were pointing out to Hitesh, which is the fact that we also don't want the government regulating, because the government amended these intermediary liability rules to introduce digital fact-checking units. And we know that there was a problem there because the government would decide then what is false or what is misleading. But the question here is not on falsity or misleading speech. The question here is on obscenity. And I think here there needs to be some guidelines that have to be followed by platforms such as YouTube, that what users can or cannot post on those
So
platforms.
you're
It
saying the
cannot be a
platform will
free-for-all.
have to have some limited liability, correct?
The platform will have to have some limited
Ranveer
liability. Now, I
Alabhadia is getting
understand the
targeted,
dangers are that
YouTube
it
is
should
getting
not
away.
restrict free speech excessively, but it has to have some form of limited liability. It can't simply say the user has posted it, Ranveer Alabhadia has done it, and I don't know anything about this. It cannot work that way.